Well, good morning. Project for the day is we need to make a set of these to fit on one of these. So this is a small, what is this, about a number 8 I think it was. This is a cheap Chinese, and I showed this before. God, getting old, can't see. Yeah, this is a number 8. And it's a silicone carbide crucible. So what we're going to do is we're just going to form up a little bit of round stock and a little bit of flat stock and see if we can't make a holder for this, or a set of lifting tongs. So this is an old crappy one, and it doesn't entirely well fit this crucible. This is not what it was made, or this is not what these tongs were made for. But that's what we're after right there. It's something very similar to that. So that is a obsolete crucible, I'm going to call it. I don't use that one anymore, but kind of keep it around for posterity just because. So actually the plan today was to be working on the sand mower project, and I had ordered my 4-inch round stock off of our wondrous little auction site, and that's been 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And it seems as though I ran across a seller that decided he wasn't going to ship product. So when I initially ordered that, I checked feedback ratings, and his feedback wasn't stellar, but it wasn't bad. You know, I mean, it was okay. And he lists quite a bit of round stock like that in short lengths. 4 inches by 7 inches is what I think it was, and I think he still got 2 or 3 of those listings up there, and it was a good price. So I jumped on it and got it on the way. Well, never heard anything, never got any notifications or anything. So I emailed him, and I got no response. But then a tracking number popped up saying that a tracking number had been created. So he went ahead and bought the thing. Another week and a half went by. I emailed him twice more, I think. Didn't respond at all, wouldn't get any response. Finally I got eBay involved, and they've had to refund the money finally. So always check these guys' ratings. You know, to me, 100% positive rating doesn't really mean anything. You know, if you do halfway decent, why people tend to be good even as buyers or selling something to someone, and if the transaction comes out okay, if there's no major problems, or if they're slow shipping but they get their product, people tend to give positive feedback for that. So 100% positive feedback doesn't always mean a whole lot to me. Once you get below about 95% feedback, I'm usually avoiding those sellers because there's usually some issues along the way. And when I initially checked his was still okay. And then as the week went on, while I checked tracking a couple more times, and he had a couple of complaints about him, and his feedback rating dropped dramatically, and it was the same issues I was having. He was slow shipping, it was poorly packaged, which for me, for this issue, it was a hunk of steel. I didn't, you know, as long as I got it here, I didn't really even care if it was dented a little bit, because it goes to the lathe and then the planer. But I guess a couple other people left the exact same problems that I had, that he had created a tracking number, but it was waiting to be delivered to the post office. The post office never received it. So he created a tracking number to make people look like he was doing what he was supposed to be doing, but then the product never got shipped. So whatever the reasoning is behind that, I don't know. So I'm still searching for product. But I guess the only reason I bring this up is I ran down this morning while it was still cool to my local steel supplier, and thinking they might have something. Last time I checked, before I actually ordered this, while I looked, and they didn't have anything that big around in their surplus lot. And they didn't this morning either. But what I did get from them was this must be about a 4-foot hunk of 1/4 by 1 1/4 inches. I think these are about 4 foot, not quite 4 foot. What do we got? Yeah, this is a 4-footer. And then they had, this was one piece, I had them cut it in half. It's 5/8, so it would have been just under 8 feet. And the two of them, they came out of their scrap. You know, I bought it by the pound, which their by the pound price has gone up, but I think both of them, tax and everything, was $8.30 some cents, something like that. So goodbye. Now I have changed my mind since then for this little crucible and for what I'm going to melt in it at the time. This rod is way overkill, and I knew it was way overkill. So it's going to go into my steel rack, and I do have some 1/2-inch cold roll that I've already cut the length. I'm going to use these. We're going to bend about probably 3 inches on either end. Now I've shortened up the length of the handle. I don't think it's necessary to have quite the length that I had on there. That one's about 30 inches above the crucible, and this one's going to end up with about 26 inches. 25, 26 inches. So that'll be plenty for reaching in and grabbing the small little crucible out of this. I'm going to do everything else, I think, out of this stock right here. It's a little bit heavy for part of it, but we'll use it we'll cut a couple of pieces for our cross support right across here. I got a couple of scraps from the sand molar project from cutting the wheels out that I'm going to use to gusset with, and we're just going to weld it together. I could either fire up the furnace to melt my metal or heat my metal to bend it. I think I'll probably, for these little projects, I think I'll probably just oxygen acetylene it. But yeah, my options are either fire up the foundry furnace or fire up the forge, and I don't feel like doing either of those, so we'll probably just oxygen acetylene it and see how far we get. So, alright, before the sun gets to beating down too bad on us here, I've already cut my material for most of it, and I'll get out the plasma cutter after a bit to cut my gussets out and around the edges. But what I did is I cut 2 7 1/4 inches long, and granted this is for a number 8 crucible, 2 7 1/4 inch long pieces. They're going to come here, and I'm going to bend the bottom edge around, and I think I've got enough of this stuff to form and bend. I think I'm going to weld it up as flats and then just fire up the foundry furnace, use it to heat this stuff up, and then whack it into shape. So this is going to mount on the side with it turned down in. I've got 4-inch pieces for the top. They're going to mount here like this, and our pivot will mount right on the side. And then for farther up here, we're going to form a piece around here to match, and then right at the bottom we're going to form a piece around there. So I'm just going to weld them right in the middle, top and bottom, and then when we heat them up we'll be able to form them. So that's kind of the plan. I think probably we're going to have to weld the upper piece in first. This one will weld in just about there probably, which is going to be down 3 inches to the top. So if we take those and weld them 3 inches to the top on both of them, and then we'll weld these right on the bottom. Of course we're going to want them centered up like that. That will be our 2 sides, and then we'll form them up after we've got them welded on. So that's the plan. We'll just lay them out and cut and tack them in place. These pieces are 3 inches long. These are 5 inches long. These uppers are 4 1/4, and the uprights are 7 1/4. Okay, I think that gives us enough space all the way around, and I think I like that. We'll let that cool. I'll go ahead and reclamp it, and then I'll go ahead and drill my one main pivot hole, and we can probably go ahead and, yeah, we'll go ahead and weld on our arms up above. That way when we heat this up to forge it, why we can use that as a handle. So that'll work pretty good, I think. So here's our tongue so far. Sit down on there, pull our handles apart, it'll lock onto it, and lift her up. So next thing is we'll go ahead and just weld our 1/2-inch handles on here. Actually, we might want to bend them first, and that way they will be in line. We can lay it flat on the table and weld them on, and they'll be in alignment. Out of our 48-inch piece of stock, we have this much left, 8 inches. So, get this other stuff out of the way. Actually, I guess it doesn't matter. We can bend them afterwards, can't we? Won't make a bit of difference. So if we weld one on this side and one on that side. We're going to weld them on just like that. And I think we'll clamp them down onto the table and weld them down on there. That way we know square to the world. We're going to weld that right on there just like that. It's going to be perfect. Okay. Just like that. Now we may have to bend those handles a little bit. They may want to interfere. But that's okay. That's basic shape right there. We'll fire up the forge. We'll forge these around to make them a little bit closer fit. And we'll just form them around a piece of pipe here so the radiuses are pretty close. Bend the bottom in a little bit, and Bob's your uncle. Now I'm going to have to bend the upper arms so that they match, even if this all works, so that we got clearance there, because they're going to interfere. Okay, we got too tight there at the bottom. I think everything else will just cold form here. Maybe. happy with that fit. That looks pretty good. We're going to throw some paint at it, which is going to burn off, but nonetheless it'll spiff it up a little bit. Alright, well, we have a set of lifting tongs done. This was the set that I was using for a copy. This is a set that I made years and years ago for a crucible that's bigger than this number 8. And I kind of used the same model on this set. And these paint will burn off first time. I'll actually burn off that paint in the furnace before I latch it onto a crucible. But now I've got a good set of lifting tongs that fit the crucibles, and I think they'll work great. The next thing I've got to do is build a pouring shank for it, and this was an original pouring shank, and why I cut them apart I don't really know, but I've got to build a smaller one. And what I think I'm going to do is excuse me, I think what I'm going to do is kind of build a modular design. We'll sleeve this so that I can have different heads, because I'll only pour one at a time. So I'll just sleeve it back in there, and we can put a latch mechanism on to match whatever crucible. It'll be a whole lot easier to do that than to use the extra material for handle and everything. So that's the plan there. Now, what I would do differently on building these tongs, if I were doing them again, is I would take and figure out what I wanted for my pieces here. I would do these portions and go ahead and bend them, fit them to the crucible, then I would fit them around and do my spacing and drill them and everything. That way your curves and bends are going to match up to the crucible better. I had to fiddle around with this to get a good fit on it, but it works out. It'd be a little bit easier, I think, like I say, to do it kind of modularly and then put your handles on afterwards. So that's done. One of the reasons I say it's not bad to use a steel crucible is for a lot of people in the small home foundry, you're going to be better off with a steel crucible from a safety standpoint. Now, the guys that do this all the time and are big on some of the forums and everything will say, no, we don't even want you here if you're using a steel crucible. And I think that's wrong. And the reason is, yes, a regular crucible is going to be a better setup, and that's what everybody should use for their foundry. Is we should be using either a clay graphite or a silicon carbide crucible. And I definitely believe that. I agree with that. The problem I have with it is you need a set of lifting tongs and a pouring shank to fit it. And for the guy starting out, if you are on a budget, which all of us are, why, you can afford the crucible. You can spend, you know, that $30 to $100 for a crucible, depending on the size you're getting and the quality of it and everything. But when you look at a set of lifting tongs, they are, last time I looked for a new set of tongs, were $250 on up for a set of tongs, and that's beyond the budget of most guys in their home foundry. And I just saw it again the other day, and it makes me cringe, because I saw somebody pouring. They had a crucible, and they lifted it out of the furnace with a pair of tongs just like this. Now, it may not have had this big a hole in the center for holding stuff for your forge, but it was a set of tongs exactly like this. Still had the curved jaws in here. I watched them go in and go like this and lift their crucible out. To me, that is far more dangerous, and you're far more likely to have a disastrous failure of that crucible by lifting it that way. So, in my opinion, you are far safer to have a steel crucible with some means to lift it, you know, a welded up crucible anyway. You've either got notches cut in it to hook in your lifting setup, and then I've got a hook on the bottom of mine that I pour with. You can have studs protruding that your lifting tong slips down over them that way. Whatever the case may be, but to me that is far safer than trying to lift a crucible with a set of foundry tongs or forge tongs type of thing. You're putting all that stress on one edge of the crucible, and I feel that's a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. So that's why I still promote a steel crucible. I think for the home foundries, a lot of guys are better off starting out that way. Now, yes, you should move on up to either a silicon carbide or a clay graphite crucible, depending on what alloy you're pouring. But to get started, you want to be as safe as you can, and you know, I'm all for personal risk management. You decide what your risk standards are, and you're responsible for what you do. So that's my take on that. So that's why I still promote a steel crucible for a lot of guys getting started, and that's why I still pour out a steel crucible occasionally. You know, I've got some things that I pour, and capacity-wise, I've got my piece of tubing here that's going to be my bigger crucible. I had the plasma cutter out earlier today. I was going to cut that, and I just ran out of steam doing it. It's starting to get hot here again. So anyway, that's my latest little rant. So I hope you found this a little bit interesting, give you some ideas on setting up some foundry equipment. And if you got any comments or suggestions, leave them in the comments section below. Like it, share it, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell notification if this interests you so you know when I put out a new video. And as always, thanks for taking the time to watch.